Often regarded as the greatest catcher of all time, Johnny Bench revolutionized the catcher position with hitting ability rarely ever seen at that position. But with a tremendous career, Bench also dealt with injuries that affected him on and off the field. So let's look at the career of Johnny Bench and if it could have been even better.
Totally sports-esque. Major League.
Bench was born in 1947 in Oklahoma City, with his family moving a few times around the area and eventually settling in Binger. He began playing baseball with his two brothers at the age of 6, with his father starting the team, and he also told Johnny that the quickest way to get to the big leagues was to be a catcher. And he of course was inspired by Mickey Mantle, who also grew up in a small town in Oklahoma about 300 miles away. He excelled at catching and pitching, and by the second grade, he began telling his classmates that he was going to play in the majors. And he practiced his autograph in class, as the kids practiced ducking under their desk to hide from a nuclear bomb. And like Mickey Mantle, he was good in multiple sports, making the all-state teams in baseball and basketball while also being the valedictorian. And it was also here where a bus carrying his high school baseball team lost its brakes and rolled down a 50-foot ravine, killing 2 of Bench's friends and teammates. Bench was knocked unconscious, but didn't suffer much physical harm, though the incident naturally had a long-term effect on him. And after high school, he could have gone to college on a baseball and basketball scholarship, but in the first ever MLB draft in 1965, the Cincinnati Reds drafted Bench 36 overall, the Reds' second pick ever, and their best ever, rivaling Nolan Ryan for the best pick in the entire draft. He opted to sign with the Reds for $6,000 and went on to play in the Florida State League, where he hit .248 with 2 home runs. But he was complimented on his defense, and he felt and acted like a leader, as he said he did not feel overwhelmed playing amongst major leaguers as a teenager. He was considered for the Reds in 1966, but instead was sent to the Single-A Peninsula Grays, where he hit .294 with 22 home runs, later being called up to Triple-A Buffalo. But before he did, the Grays retired his number 8, and in his first inning in Triple-A, he unfortunately broke his thumb on a foul tip, and that would end his season. And even worse, on the drive back home, he got into an accident with a drunk driver while in the 1965 Ford Fairlane he bought with his bonus money. He would end up in the hospital, feeling lucky to escape, just like the bus accident, and he would end up needing 27 stitches in his scalp. He would recover, and at 19 years old with a team of veterans, he returned to Triple-A, hitting .259 with 23 home runs, with one of those home runs being a grand slam off Jim Palmer. And the reason that's notable is Palmer never gave up a grand slam in his 19-year Major League Hall of Fame career. He would go on to be named the Minor League Player of the Year by the Sporting News, and he would be called up to the majors in late August. He hit just .163 with 1 home run, but many were impressed with his defense and his arm. And one of those was Ted Williams, who predicted that he would make the Hall of Fame. A pretty good compliment and a lot of hype to live up to. And the Reds echoed Williams' feelings when they fully committed to him by trading their 2-time Gold Glove winner and 3-time All-Star catcher, Johnny Edwards, to make room for a new Johnny. Bench made it to spring training with the Reds, and his confidence and leadership was on full display. Jim Maloney, who was going into his 8th season with the Reds, had lost a lot on his fastball after injuries. Maloney, of course, thought he still had it, and repeatedly shook off Bench when he called for breaking balls, causing Bench to bluntly tell Maloney that his fastball was not popping, and Maloney replied with a kind gesture. Then to prove that it was true, when Maloney threw his next fastball, Bench dropped his glove and caught it barehanded. Very bold for a 21-year-old, but also the reason he was there at that age, as Bench would later catch Maloney's no-hitter he threw in 1969. And back in 1968, Bench rose to stardom quickly. He got his first start on April 17th and would be in the lineup for the next 81 games. At the All-Star break, he hit 7 home runs and drove in 44 runners while hitting .267 with a .714 OPS. And for this, he was named to the All-Star team as a rookie, where he caught the 9th inning of a 1-0 victory for the National League. And by September, he was the cleanup hitter on the team that scored the most runs in the league. He finished his rookie season hitting 15 home runs, 40 doubles, and driving in 82 while hitting .272 with a .743 OPS. And something you have to remember is 1968 was the year of the pitcher, where the league average was .243, as he led all catchers in offensive numbers, and for this, he became the first catcher to win Rookie of the Year. And along with his great offensive numbers, what really made Bench noticeable is what makes all catchers notable in their defense. He would have 102 assists that year, the first time a rookie catcher had more than 100 assists in 23 years. He also threw out 44 would-be base stealers, as he became the first rookie to win a Gold Glove at catcher. And in watching Bench, you can see how he differentiated from catchers of his time. He was one of the first catchers to catch with one hand behind his back, breaking his thumb in Triple-A, a big reason for that. He also wore a hinged catcher's mitt, different from the circular catcher's mitts normally worn by catchers of the time, helping him to make plays on bunts and plays at the plate. And yet agility most catchers didn't have, especially at 6'1" and 200 pounds. To go along with his huge hands, that could hold 7 baseballs, which he liked to showcase. With the hitting, fielding, and leadership abilities, it's pretty obvious that the Reds made the right decision. And he was even better in his follow-up season. Again, he made the All-Star team, only this time he was the starting catcher, as he would hit a home run and a single, and he would later be robbed of a second home run. And in the first season of the playoffs expanding to a whole 4 teams, the Reds were neck and neck with the Braves and Giants all season, but would ultimately finish 4 games out as Bench hit 26 home runs, driving in 90 with a .293 average and an .840 OPS, as he compiled a 6.2 WAR, as he again received MVP votes and a Gold Glove, having a 57.1 caught stealing percentage, the best in the league. And that led things into arguably Bench's best season and the start of the Big Red Machine. Looking to take the next step, the Reds hired Sparky Anderson as their next manager, managing a team with all-stars Pete Rose, Tony Perez, the stolen base leader Bobby Tolan, and of course, they were led by their catcher, the backbone of any dynasty. During the first half of the 1970 season, they played the last games at Crosley Field. By the time they left, it went into the new Riverfront Stadium. They had a 10-game lead. Bench again started the All-Star game, and this edition was at the brand new stadium in Cincinnati. And at the break, he was hitting .285 with a .949 OPS and 28 home runs, more than he had in the previous full season. And the Reds and Bench dominated the rest of the season, winning 102 games to easily win the NL West. And Bench's season was historic. He would hit .293 with a .932 OPS and a league-leading 7.4 WAR amongst position players, with his 148 RBIs being a franchise record and his 45 home runs being a record for catchers in MLB history, 4 more than Roy Campanella hit in 1953, making Bench just the second catcher to hit 40 home runs in a season. And that record stood for 51 years until Salvador Perez hit 48 in 2021. He was the first catcher to lead the league in home runs, as he was close to a triple crown, as he would easily win MVP. And he led the Reds to the playoffs for the first time since 1961, where they lost the World Series to the Yankees. And in their first ever NLCS, they went against the Pirates, and it was really their pitching that was terrible the year prior that led them to a sweep. Interestingly, they won 3-0, 3-1, and 3-2 to win in 3 games, with Bench not getting his first postseason hit until Game 3, which would be a home run, following a Tony Perez home run, which would be the difference as the Reds were back in the World Series. And their opponent was the Orioles. The dynasty of the late 60s, they let the Reds know that they weren't done yet, as Frank Robinson would beat his former team, as the Orioles pitching was too much, as they won in 5 games, with Bench getting hits in 4 games, but only hitting .211 in the series, with other Reds besides Lee May and Hal McRae not doing much better. Either way, the season made Bench the face of baseball, and Bench also wanted to be the face of baseball. He went on a USO tour with Bob Hope in Vietnam, went golfing with Arnold Palmer, appeared on talk shows and TV shows, and even had his own weekly TV show in Cincinnati. As he said, my push for visibility during the offseason, even at age 22, was intentional, but 1971 would be humbling for the Reds and Bench. Bobby Tolan missed the season with an injury. Reliable players had down years, including Bench, who hit .238 with 27 home runs and 61 RBIs, 87 less than the previous year, partly attributed to the fact that he was worse offensively and there were less runners to drive in. But he was still great defensively and won his 4th Gold Glove, along with making his 4th All-Star game, where he hit a long home run off MVP Vida Blue. But the Reds would make a huge move in the offseason that would propel them back to the top by trading for Joe Morgan, losing Gold Glove second baseman Tommy Helms, but this would be one of the best moves in Reds history. Before the season started, they were on the cover of Sports Illustrated with the headline, Redemption for the Reds, and they would redeem themselves. At the All-Star break, they were 16 games over 500. Meanwhile, Bench was in the midst of redemption himself, as again he was the starting catcher for the All-Star team, hitting 21 home runs and 61 RBIs at the break, the same amount of RBIs he had in the entirety of 1971, and him and the Reds kept rolling in the second half. The Dodgers and Joe Morgan's former team, the Astros, never really threatened them, as he won 95 games and won the division by 10.5 games. Meanwhile, Bench had his best season by WAR, as he again led the league in home runs at 40 and RBIs at 125. As he hit .270 with a .920 OPS, winning MVP for the second time, as he compiled an 8.6 WAR, actually less than Joe Morgan and Steve Carlton, who won the pitching Triple Crown. And the reason his WAR was higher than ever was his defensive WAR was higher than ever, compiling a 2.5 defensive WAR, as he would lead the league in that stat for the first and only time, as he also led the league in caught stealing percentage for the second time. And going into the playoffs, it would be a rematch for the Reds, as they were again facing the Pirates, who had just won the World Series the previous year over the team the Reds couldn't beat in the Orioles. And the series was different right away, as the Pirates picked up a win at home in Game 1. But the Reds responded in Game 2 as Bench picked up his first hit, that being an RBI double, and things went back to Cincinnati for the rest of the series, tied at 1. And despite Bench hitting his first postseason triple, the Reds would drop Game 3, one loss away from elimination. But Game 4 would be the only game decided by more than 2 runs, as Bench picked up 2 hits and an RBI, as the Reds won 7-1 to set up a decisive Game 5. And in one of the best NLCS games of all time, the Pirates scored 2 in the second, and they never lost lead going into the 9th, leading 3-2. And into the game, looking to clinch the pennant for the Pirates, was Dave Giusti, and to lead off the inning was the MVP, Johnny Bench. And he would fall down in the count 1-2. Then Giusti would throw a changeup, and Bench would hit it over the right field wall, sending the crowd into a frenzy and causing Reds announcer Al Michaels to hit a high note in the booth, the definition of a clutch home run. But it wasn't over yet. The Reds hit back-to-back singles, then a fly ball advanced the runners. But Bob Moose got Darrell Chaney to pop out to shorten his next at-bat, looking like he might get out of the jam. But then, Moose would proceed to throw a wild pitch to pinch hitter Hal McRae, which scored George Foster, and the Reds had won the pennant. This the second time a series ended on a wild pitch, and funny enough, the first time was in 1927, when the Yankees also beat the Pirates in the World Series. In the 1972 World Series, the Reds went against an emerging dynasty in the Oakland Athletics. And again, things were going to be decided in a do-or-die game, with Bench hitting 300 through the first 6 games, with all but Game 6 being decided by 1 run. And Game 7 was no different, as it was tied throughout, but 2 runs scored in the 6th would be the difference, as this would be the 6th one-run game in the series, with Raleigh Fingers picking up a save and a 3-2 win. So now the Reds had lost the World Series for the 3rd time in 11 seasons. However, they weren't done yet, with Bench being just 24 at that point and already near the Hall of Fame, making 5 All-Star teams, winning 5 Gold Gloves, winning 2 MVPs, while leading the league in home runs twice, with no catcher before him doing so, and also leading the Reds to 2 pennants. In 1972 would really be the end of his peak, and the reason was an off-field issue. Bench had played the postseason with a big worry in the back of his mind. During a physical, doctors found a growth on Bench's lung that could not be identified, and during the offseason, he underwent surgery, with the surgeon having to make a 12-inch incision under his right arm and being forced to break a rib, extracting a benign lesion that he likely got from inhaling an airborne fungus. And Bench himself said he would never be the same again, and that's mainly in regards to his power, as he would never hit more than 35 home runs again, but he was still the best catcher in the league for a while. Over the next 3 seasons, he would continue his trend of hitting at least 25 home runs and driving in over 100, with his 129 RBIs in 1974, making it the 3rd time he had the most RBIs in the league. He also continued his trend of making the All-Star team and winning a Gold Glove in each season, and by the end of his age 27 season, he had 8 Gold Gloves, 8 All-Star appearances, and 2 MVPs, hitting 240 home runs, driving in 855 runners with a 271 average, numbers nearly identical to Hall of Famer Roy Campanella, who played 10 seasons. And he was already 3rd all-time amongst catchers in home runs, bound past Campanella, and behind only Yogi Berra. So to that point, Bench was already a Hall of Famer, and the only thing missing after the 1975 regular season was a World Series title. The Reds won 99 games in 73 and lost the NLCS to the Mets. They won 98 the next year, but lost the NL West to the Dodgers. But in 75, they left no doubt, as they won a franchise record 108 games, with Joe Morgan winning MVP after compiling a WAR of 11. And for the 3rd time that decade, the Reds were facing the Pirates in the NLCS, and the series was more like 1970 than 72. Bench had just 1 hit in his 14 plate appearances, but his team picked him up as he outscored the Pirates 14-4 in Cincinnati before they would win a 10-inning game in Game 3 to win their 3rd pennant of the decade, all 3 times beating the Pirates in the NLCS to get there. And now, they were hoping to get to where they could in the previous 3 tries, and they were going up against a team who also had World Series troubles dating back to 1918 in the Red Sox, and what would be a very red World Series, and also a battle between the 2 best catchers of the era, in Carlton Fisk and Johnny Bench. And in Game 1 in Fenway, it was a pitcher's duel between Louis Tiant and Don Gullett until the 7th, when the Red Sox scored 6, as they would win 6-0. And Game 2 would again be a pitcher's duel, with the Red Sox leading 2-1 going to the 9th, and to lead off the 9th, Johnny Bench would hit a huge double, which ended Bill Lee's day after 8 innings. Dick Drago came in, and Bench went to 3rd on a groundout before George Foster popped out, but Dave Concepcion would drive in Bench on a 2-out single. Then Ken Griffey would hit a game-winning double, as the Reds won a massive Game 2 in comeback fashion. Game 3 would be another back-and-forth game, with the Reds getting their first lead with a 2-run home run by Bench in the 4th. The Reds would add another 3 the next inning, but the Red Sox chipped away, and Dwight Evans would hit a game-tying home run in the 9th to send things to extras, where the Reds would load the bases, then Joe Morgan would hit the game-winning single. and Game 4 would again go down to the wire. But it didn't look like it would when Ken Griffey and Johnny Bench hit RBI doubles in the first inning. However, the Red Sox would score 5 in the fourth, and though the Reds scored another 2 in the bottom of the fourth, no runs would be scored again as Louis Tiant threw a complete game with 163 pitches, guaranteeing things went back to Fenway. Game 5 again looked like it could be another game that went down to the wire, but after a 3-run sixth, thanks to Tony Perez's 2 home runs, after he started the series 0 for 15, the Reds won 6-2 with a jam from Don Gullett. And that led things to the famous Game 6. It actually happened 5 days after Game 5 because of rain delays, and it started with a 3-run home run from Fred Lynn. The Red Sox maintained the 3-run lead until the 5th, when Ken Griffey hit a 2-run triple, then Johnny Bench would drive him in to tie the game. The Red Sox would add 3 in the 7th and the 8th, and looked poised to finally capture their title until Bernie Carbo would hit a 3-run home run off Raleigh Eastwick in the bottom of the 8th to tie the game. And things looked real bad for the Reds when the Red Sox loaded the bases with no outs in the 9th. And after walking Carlton Fisk, Fred Lynn would hit a foul ball that was caught by Foster. He made a great throw home, and Bench caught the ball on a bounce and made a sweeping tag to just get Denny Doyle. Bench's tags being an underrated part of his game, along with many catchers. The Reds would then get out of the jam, and things went to extras. And after a scoreless 10th, Pete Rose was hit to start the 11th, and he would be thrown out at second on a bunt attempt. Then Joe Morgan would hit a drive to right that looked to be extra bases until Dwight Evans would make an incredible leaping catch and doubled off Griffey at first. The Red Sox couldn't score in the bottom half, and the Reds couldn't either in the top of the 12th, despite hitting 2 singles. And that brought up Carlton Fisk in the bottom of the 12th. And on the second pitch, he hit a drive to left that he waved fair, and it would hit the foul pole to end the game. The Red Sox would win this wild game that defined the series, and it looked like the Red Sox now had the momentum and were bound to break the curse, while the Reds were bound for another World Series disappointment. Either way, the Reds were still alive, but Game 7 didn't start out too well as the Red Sox scored 3 in the 3rd, while Bill Lee had shut out the Reds for the first 5 innings. But in the 6th, with Pete Rose on first with 1 out, Bench would hit a grounder to short that looked to be an inning-ending double play, but Rose slid in hard to second, forcing an errant throw into the dugout that moved Bench to second, and he would move home when Tony Perez had a huge 2-run home run over the Green Monster. In the next inning, Pete Rose would tie the game with a single, and it was clear the momentum had gone towards the Reds as things were tied at 3 going to the 9th. Griffey would lead off the inning with a walk, then he moved to second on a bunt and third on a groundout. Pete Rose walked, and that brought up the MVP in Joe Morgan, and he would proceed to hit a bloop single to give them a 1-run lead, as they would get a 1-2-3 9th to finally win their World Series. With a team full of Hall of Famers, this brought them much closer to Cooperstown after coming up short in previous years. And it was a triumph for Bench that was a difficult year on and off the field. He dealt with shoulder problems throughout the year after he would get into a collision in April, and he dealt with the flu during the postseason. And there were problems in his personal life. Along with being from a small town in Oklahoma, another thing Bench had in common with Mickey Mantle was he had a pretty active social life. He was described as baseball's most eligible bachelor, and his bachelor life ended when he saw model Vicky Chesser in a toothpaste commercial and called her for a date. Then just 4 days after meeting her, he proposed. They then married a few weeks after, and shocker, the marriage wasn't too strong. It was highly publicized in the tabloids, and they said they didn't really have an idea of what marriage was. And they would be divorced 13 months after, with Chesser calling Bench a great athlete, a mediocre everything else, and a true tragedy as a person. He would remain single for the rest of his career. He didn't have as much to deal with in his personal life, but he would have the worst season of his career to that point in 1976. He dealt with shoulder and back cramps that affected his swing and his catching ability, as he played in just 134 games and hit just .234 with 16 home runs and 74 RBIs while playing on a great offensive team. He still won another Gold Glove, and he made the All-Star team with his name helping him, but it was very poor by his standards. But the Reds were dominant again, winning 102 games, as Joe Morgan won his 2nd straight MVP, and Pat Zachary would win Rookie of the Year. And the postseason would showcase why they were one of the best teams of all time. And it also gave Bench a chance for redemption. And they weren't playing the Pirates this time in the NLCS, but they were playing a Pennsylvania team in the Phillies. And their incredible offense was on display, scoring 6 runs in each of the first 2 games, with Bench getting 3 hits. And in Game 3, the Phillies looked like they were going to get their first win, as they led 6-4 going to the 9th. But then, George Foster cut the lead in half with a home run, bringing up Johnny Bench. And for the 2nd time in his career, he would hit a game-tying home run in an NLCS clinching game. Then after a rally, Ken Griffey would hit a walk-off single for the Reds to win their 2nd straight pennant, sweeping the NLCS in back-to-back years. And for the 2nd straight year, they were going up against an AL East opponent, this time being the Yankees. As again, Bench went up against one of the best catchers of the era in Thurman Munson. And just like the NLCS, the series wouldn't be very competitive. Things were momentarily tied in the first 2 innings of Game 1, but the Reds broke away, with Johnny Bench recording 2 hits, including an RBI triple. And he again had 2 hits in Game 2, with one being a double. And this would be the tightest game of the series. The Reds took a 3-run lead in the second, and Thurman Munson's groundout tied things in the 7th, as Catfish Hunter was rolling. But after an error in the bottom of the 9th that put Griffey at second, Joe Morgan was intentionally walked, then Tony Perez would hit a game-winning single to put the Reds up 2-0, as they went to New York, and they would continue to dominate. For the 3rd straight game, Bench had 2 hits, as the Reds would easily win 6-2, and now they were 1 game away from another title. In Game 4, what cement Johnny Bench as an incredible postseason player. Tied at 1, Bench would hit a go-ahead 2-run home run in the 4th. The Yankees added 1 with an RBI single from Munson, who would have 4 hits in the game, and it would remain close until the 9th, when Bench hit a 3-run home run, which sealed the series, as the Reds would add 1 more, and they won 7-2 to sweep the entire playoffs, the only team to do so in the LCS era, as Bench hit .533 with a 1.667 OPS in the series, along with having 4 extra base hits, as he would win World Series MVP, basically winning everything you could in a career at that point, as he called this World Series win more satisfying than the previous year after his rough regular season. 1977 would be his last big year, as he hit 31 home runs and drove in 109 runners, the 6th and final time that he hit at least 25 home runs and drove in at least 100. Also his 10th and final Gold Glove that season, as the Reds won less than 90 games for the first time since 1971, and they finished 2nd in the NL West. And the Big Red Machine began to decline. Tony Perez was traded, and within a few years, Pete Rose, Joe Morgan, and even Sparky Anderson were on different teams. Despite this, Bench decided to re-sign with the Reds at 5 years and $400,000 a year, a lot at the time, though he could have gotten a lot more if he went to another team. Bench continued to be a star in his final 5 years, dealing with minor injuries developed from the past, as the biggest reason he never won another Gold Glove being that he didn't catch as much, playing other positions, and only playing more than 120 games once in those final 5 seasons, though he would hit at least 20 home runs in the last 2 seasons of the 70s and in 1980, as his 13 consecutive All-Star appearances ended the next year. He also made his final playoff appearance with the Reds in 1979, and funny enough, it was against the Pirates, the 4th time the two played in the NLCS that decade, and finally, the Pirates got their revenge, when they swept the Reds, and they went on to beat the Orioles in the World Series for the 2nd time that decade, with Bench playing in 10 postseason series and hitting a home run in 9 of those series. After struggling in a strike-shortened season in 1981, Bench would play 2 more seasons at third base, where it became clear that it was time to retire. He went on a retirement tour in 1983, getting ovations at every stadium, with Johnny Bench Night being hosted on September 17th, where he would hit his 389th and final home run in front of a sold-out crowd in Riverfront Stadium, the most home runs of all time by a catcher at the time, until he would later be surpassed by Mike Piazza. Bench finished his career hitting .267 with an .817 OPS, hitting those 389 home runs with 1,376 RBIs and a WAR of 75.1. Making the Hall of Fame in his first ballot, receiving 96.4% of the vote, the highest ever for a catcher. And when he retired, most considered him the greatest catcher of all time, and it's still hard to dispute that, considering he still has the highest WAR amongst any catcher who's ever played, with Gary Carter at 2nd at 70.2. And that's even more impressive when you consider his final 3 seasons were poor, compiling just a 2.2 WAR over those 3 seasons. You can debate about the best catcher of all time, with Ivan Rodriguez being the closest in my opinion, considering all-around performance, and you can include Yogi Berra, Carlton Fisk, Mike Piazza, Gary Carter, Yadier Molina, and Josh Gibson, who never got a chance, along with many more. But there's a reason Bench is the benchmark, along with Bench inspiring numerous great catchers after him, with his hinged catcher's mitt, his hand behind the back, and picking balls in the dirt instead of blocking. These were trends really started by Bench, with few having the talent to come close. But you can also wonder if he could have been even better. It's very interesting how similar he was to Mickey Mantle, his boyhood idol for obvious reasons. But along with being first ballot Hall of Famers, they both had big social lives and injuries that make you wonder if they could have been even better. Bench would get left and right hip replacements right after he retired, and that goes back to freak injuries he was staying when he was a teenager. Obviously, catching is physically demanding, and Bench's lack of longevity at the position is his only mark when looking at his career. But 3 of Bench's biggest injuries weren't even related to the field. He was in 2 car accidents when he was just a teenager, and the surgery to remove a lesion from his lung. Bench would say he was never the same player after that, and in terms of what he did in 70 and 72, he was correct, because he would never reach those heights again, and you wonder if he did have a few more seasons like that, would Bench be in more discussions for being the best position player of all time. Catchers get left out because the physical demands naturally take a toll on their offense, which is why Mike Piazza's 427 home runs, being the most for a catcher, is the second lowest high behind second baseman in terms of position. If Bench had 3 more average seasons instead of what he put up in those final 3 seasons, that's an additional 54 home runs. Granted, 1981 was shortened, but that would put him ahead of Piazza. You also wonder if he could have caught a few more seasons without that surgery to back up his defensive numbers. It's just hypotheticals like he could do with any player, but considering how catching affects offensive output and the freak injuries he sustained, Bench should still be in top discussions for his all-around work and his influence. Considering the 70s Reds are one of the best dynasties, and Bench was the best and most important player in that dynasty, full of Hall of Famers. He was ahead of his time and could easily be talked about in even higher regards without some misfortune. And you can watch my video about Mickey Mantle and see why some wonder if he also could have been even better. Hopefully you liked this video, and if so, please consider liking and subscribing for new videos every week. Thank you.